YouTube, and welcome to Musicology for the People's last video for Women's History Month. As I mentioned in my video last week, I sent out a request on Twitter and Facebook asking for suggestions of women composers that you would like to hear about this. I was flooded with responses, but I noticed that quite a few of them were about women in jazz music history. So, since we haven't talked about them before, I thought we would talk about three of the greatest queens in jazz music. First, let's talk about Mary Lou Williams. Mary Lou was born Mary Elfrida Scruggs in 1910 in Atlanta, Georgia, but she was raised mostly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was a child prodigy. She taught herself to play piano and began performing at the age of 6. She was performing because she was earning money to support her and her 10 siblings. By her early teens, she had quite a performance reputation going. In fact, by the time she was 15, she was playing with Duke Ellington. She also played for Louis Armstrong, and the first time he heard her play, he apparently walked up to her, picked her up off the piano bench, and gave her a big kiss because he was so happy with the way she played. She got married in 1927 at the age of 17 to a saxophone player, John Williams. In 1929, she began to make recordings with Andy Kirk's band and also some solo recordings of her own. The track that we've been listening to so far was one of those solo recordings, and it's called Nightlife. Mary Lou's compositions, arrangements, and performances were distinctive and revolutionary. Some of the greatest minds in jazz music have been influenced by her. For example, she wrote arrangements for Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington. She was also a friend and mentor to Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Tad Dameron, and even Dizzy Gillespie. More importantly, she blazed trails for later generations of female jazz composers and performers. An interesting fact about Mary Lou: at one point, she and her husband weren't making much money, so she got a side job conveying dead bodies to an undertaker. Sounds ghastly. The second woman that I think you all should know about is Geri Allen. Geri is also a pianist and composer. Raised in Detroit, Geri is an important facet of modern jazz music. She wrote music and performed all over, particularly in Washington, D.C., New York City, and Pittsburgh. And actually at the University of Pittsburgh, she received her master's degree in ethnomusicology. Her compositions have been described as fusing traditional and avant-garde styles. One reason that I think she's amazing is that she decided to become an educator. She's taught at Howard University, New England Conservatory, the New School of Music in New York City, and she's currently on faculty at the University of Pittsburgh. She also still composes and tours frequently with some of the current greats in jazz. We've been listening to her piece, Lush Life. Something I find really interesting about her is that she considers her music to be like abstract art. She doesn't like to answer questions like, what were you trying to convey with this piece? Instead, she'd rather that each listener has their own unique take on what she's giving them. And lastly, you should all know Maria Schneider. Maria was born in 1960 in a small town in Minnesota. She studied music theory and composition at the University of Minnesota before getting her master's in music at Eastman University in Rochester, New York. Interestingly enough, that small town she grew up in had only one jazz musician, and she grew up listening to only old recordings of jazz. Consequently, she grew up thinking that jazz music was dead and that she was born in the wrong era. It wasn't until she got to Eastman that she realized that jazz was still alive and developing today. After she graduated, she was immediately hired by Gil Evans, who is one of the most famous pianists and composers in all of jazz history. With Gil, Schneider got experience and exposure in several different genres, including film scoring. And she also got to accompany him on a tour he did with Sting. In 1992, Maria formed her own jazz orchestra, which performed weekly in Greenwich Village for a while, and then began to tour all over Europe, South America, and even Asia. Since 2005, Maria has garnered 9 Grammy Awards and has been nominated 18 times. One thing I find great about Maria is that genre boundaries cannot hold her. She composes classical music, she composes jazz music, pop music, and even film music, all successfully. We've been listening to her song Allegresse. While it's impossible to see Mary Lou perform live today, it's definitely possible to see Geri Allen and Maria Schneider's works being performed today, as both are living and still composing. I wholeheartedly recommend that you check out music by all three composers, and I'll put links down below in the description. I hope you learned something new about these great composers. As usual, subscribe, share, and check out the Twitter and Facebook pages associated with this channel. This video concludes Women's History Month, unfortunately, but this means that you're free to suggest any video topic that interests you. Until next week, play it cool. Musicology.